Kill them all. Every last one. Colonel Viktor Krasnov said it without blinking. Without hesitation, like ordering breakfast. His lead officer stood up through the vehicle hatch and waved the column forward. 31 armored machines, 80 soldiers, all of it aimed at 10 exhausted Americans trapped on a mountain with no power and no way to call for help. Krasnov didn't see soldiers. He saw bodies that hadn't fallen yet. Then his lead officer dropped. No crack, no flash, no direction. Just gone. Mid-motion, mid-command, erased from standing to nothing in a single breath, 3,200 meters away. And nobody saw where it came from. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The blizzard had been going for 31 hours. Not the kind of snow that made people reach for their cameras and post pictures online. This was the kind of snow that made men question decisions. The kind that pressed down on a structure like a slow hand, testing every bolt, every weld, every assumption about shelter. The wind didn't howl so much as it groaned, a low, constant sound that you stopped hearing after the first 12 hours and started feeling instead somewhere behind your sternum like a vibration with no source. Staff Sergeant Mark Callahan had been awake for most of those 31 hours. He stood at the northern window of the operations room watching nothing because there was nothing to watch. The visibility outside was maybe 40 feet on a good gust, less on a bad one. The mountains beyond the perimeter wire were completely gone. The road that wound up from the valley floor, the only road in or out, had disappeared under 3 feet of accumulated drifts. He knew the road was still there. He knew because roads don't disappear. But knowing something intellectually and being able to see it were two different things. And right now, Callahan was very much a man who needed to see things. Behind him, his 10 soldiers moved through the base with the practiced mechanical efficiency of people who had been running on too little sleep and too much adrenaline for too many days. They didn't talk much anymore. They'd said most of what there was to say in the first 24 hours of the lockdown. After that, you either learned to communicate in gestures and half sentences, or you learned to be quiet. His people had learned to be quiet. Specialist Davis was running diagnostics on the communications array for the 4th time that morning, even though they both knew the satellite uplink had been dead since the second night of the storm. He ran the diagnostics anyway because it gave him something to do with his hands and because stopping felt like giving up, and Davis wasn't built for giving up. Still nothing, Callahan asked, not really asking. Still nothing, Davis answered, not really answering. Private Torres was at the fuel monitor watching the generator gauge drop with the slow inevitability of a clock. He'd been doing the math in his head every 20 minutes, recalculating their remaining hours of power based on consumption rates and ambient temperature demand. He never liked the answer, but he kept doing the math anyway. 7 hours, Torres said without being asked. Maybe 8 if we cut the heating in the east wing. We're not cutting the heating in the east wing, Callahan said. I know, Torres said. That's why I said maybe 8. Callahan turned away from the window. He looked at his people, really looked at them, and felt the particular weight that only comes to sergeants who understand the difference between leading men and being responsible for them. Leading was the easy part. Being responsible was the thing that kept you awake at the northern window at 0430 in a blizzard watching 40 feet of nothing. 10 soldiers. 10 people. He knew every one of them by the sound of their boots on the floor, by the way they held their coffee cups, by the specific shape of the silence they carried. And then there was Corporal Emily Carter. She sat at the far end of the operations room, doing what she always did, nothing that drew attention, everything with a quiet precision that made you feel like you'd almost seen something important, but missed it. Her medical kit was open on the table in front of her, organized with a neatness that went beyond military standard. She wasn't cleaning instruments. She wasn't reviewing field manuals. She was just sitting, hands folded, eyes on something that wasn't in the room. Callahan had been assigned Emily Carter 6 days ago, when the base was still functional and the storm was just a forecast. She'd arrived with the orders with proper documentation, with a field medic classification that matched her uniform patches. She was qualified. She was cleared. She was exactly what her paperwork said she was. She also wore in a locked equipment case that was 47 inches long, 7 inches wide, and had a handle worn smooth from use. Not new use, long use, the kind of wear that takes years. No one was allowed to ask about it. The orders said so explicitly, which was Callahan had noted a strange thing for orders about a field medic to say. He'd asked anyway the first night. Standard medical equipment, she'd said, not looking up. That's a long case for medical equipment, he'd said. Long conditions require long preparation, she'd said. And that had been the end of that conversation because something in the way she said it, not defensive, not evasive, just settled like a door that was closed but not locked, made Callahan understand that pushing would not open it any faster. He'd watched her since then. He was a man who noticed things, and Emily Carter gave him things to notice. She asked questions that a field medic had no reason to ask. How deep was the northern ridge before the cliff edge? What was the thermal differential between the roof of the main structure and the secondary outbuildings? Which direction did the wind shift in the afternoon hours, and by how many degrees? She stood at windows longer than other people stood at windows. When they'd walked the perimeter 2 days ago, a routine check that Callahan had taken her on specifically to watch her reaction, she'd moved differently than the others. Not cautiously, not nervously. She'd moved like someone taking inventory of something she already owned. Her eyes went to roof lines, to angles, to the gap between the eastern supply building and the main wall, which was maybe 60 feet across and created a natural channel for wind that would also, Callahan had thought, and then immediately filed away for later thinking, create a natural channel for sound. She'd stopped at the northwest corner of the outer wall for a full minute, saying nothing, looking out at the mountain slope that dropped away to the north. Good sight line, she'd said finally. What? Callahan had said. Nothing, she'd said. I'm cold. Can we go back? That was 4 days ago. Callahan had been filing things away since then. At 6:13 that morning, with the blizzard still hammering the mountain and the generator burning through its last honest hours of fuel, Davis sat up straighter at the communications console. Sergeant, one word, but the way he said it, the specific compression of sound that meant he wasn't reporting routine data, brought Callahan across the room in 4 steps. Davis had managed to pull a fragmented signal through the noise. Not a full transmission, not voice, just data fragments, the kind that a sufficiently determined man with a sufficiently degraded antenna could piece together into something resembling information. It took them 11 minutes to assemble what Davis had caught. When they finished, Callahan read it twice. Then he looked up at the ceiling for a moment, the way men do when they're processing something their body understood before their mind caught up. How reliable is this? He asked. 60%, Davis said. Maybe 65. So 35% chance we're panicking over bad data. Yes, Sergeant. What does the data say? Davis cleared his throat. It says there's a column, armored, moving through the Southern Valley Pass. 30-plus vehicles. They're using the storm for cover, moving slow, but moving consistent. Current trajectory puts them on our access road in, he checked the timestamps against his mental calculation, approximately 4 hours, give or take. The room had gone quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when everyone has heard something, but no one wants to be the first person to react to it. Callahan looked around at his people. 9 faces, not counting Carter, who was still at the far table and had not visibly reacted to anything, which was itself a reaction. He filed away. Okay, we said, here's what we know. We have 10 people. We have degraded communications. We have a generator running on borrowed hours. And we may or may not have a 30-vehicle armored column moving up our mountain in a blizzard. Private Torres, who had been doing numbers in his head since the moment Davis spoke, raised his hand halfway before putting it back down. What's the play here, Sergeant? What do we actually do? It was a fair question. It was the only question. And the honest answer, the answer that Callahan would have given if honesty were the only consideration, was that he didn't know. 10 soldiers against 30 armored vehicles wasn't a tactical problem. It was a mathematical one, and the math was extremely clear about the outcome. But there was a second answer, a longer answer, the kind of answer that involved variables he didn't fully understand yet. He looked at Emily Carter. She was already looking at him, not startled, not just noticed you looking at me. She had been looking at him for some time, long enough that their eyes meeting felt less like a coincidence and more like an appointment. Corporal Carter, he said. Sergeant, she answered. You heard all of that? Yes. And she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, not hesitating, calculating. And I think, she said carefully, that 4 hours is enough time. Enough time for what? She stood up. She picked up her coffee cup, finished what was left in it, set it down with the gentle precision of someone who didn't waste movements. Enough time to make sure that column doesn't get where it's trying to go. The room was so quiet that Callahan could hear the wind finding a gap somewhere in the northern wall, pressing through it, testing it. "You're a field medic," he said. "I am," she agreed. "So what exactly do you, Sergeant?" She said his title the way a professor says a student's name when the student has asked a question that reveals they haven't been listening. Not unkind, just precise. "I'd like to get to work if that's all right." She picked up her coffee cup again, walked to the small kitchen area, rinsed it out, placed it in the drying rack. Then she walked back to the far table, picked up her medical kit, and picked up the long-locked case. "I'm going to need about 2 hours," she said, "and I'm going to need people to not ask me questions during that time." "And after that," Callahan said. She looked at him again, and this time there was something different in it. Not softness exactly, more like acknowledgement, like she was deciding how much of a door to open and settling on a crack. After that, she said, "You're going to have questions that I'll answer, but they're going to be different questions than the ones you have right now." She walked out of the operations room. Callahan stood where he was for a long moment, watching the empty doorway. "What the hell was that?" Private Reyes said from somewhere behind him. "I genuinely don't know," Callahan said. "Davis, keep working that signal. Torres give me a revised fuel estimate every 30 minutes. Everyone else weapons checks, then defensive positions. We prepare like the data is good." "And Carter?" Davis asked. Callahan picked up his own coffee, found it cold, drank it anyway. "We let her work," he said. The column reached the mouth of the access road at 0922. Not 4 hours, 2 hours and 49 minutes. The storm had slowed them less than Davis's calculation had accounted for, which meant either the weather had shifted or the column's commander had pushed his drivers harder than was smart on mountain roads in a blizzard. Pushing harder than was smart. That told Callahan something about the man in charge. Davis had managed a second fragmented transmission cleaner than the first, and from it they'd assembled a name. Colonel Viktor Krasnov. Russian trained, currently serving with a paramilitary contract force whose affiliations were less clear than their capabilities. 3 confirmed engagements in the past 18 months. In all 3, the opposing force had surrendered or withdrawn before contact. The pattern wasn't coincidence, it was psychology. Krasnov moved with overwhelming force, moved fast, and moved in conditions that denied his opponent the time and information needed to make good decisions. The blizzard wasn't a complication for him, it was a feature. Callahan had his people at positions. 9 soldiers distributed across the base's limited defensible points with weapons that were adequate for small unit engagement and completely inadequate for 30 armored vehicles. He'd been honest with them about the math. He believed in honesty with his people, not brutal honesty, not the kind that stripped away the will to function, but the clean, clear kind that said, "Here's what we're working with, and here is what we're going to do with it." What they were going to do with it was buy time and hope that the comms came back up long enough to scream for reinforcements. That was the plan. It wasn't a good plan, but it was an honest one. Emily Carter was not at her position. He'd noticed it at 0800 when he'd done his final check before the column arrived. Her bunk was empty. Her medical kit, the regulation one, was left behind. The long case was gone. He had not announced this to his team. He stood now at the northern observation point, watching the column emerge from the storm at the head of the road. 31 vehicles. He counted them as they came into view one by one like a sick kind of advent calendar. Armored personnel carriers, 2 light tanks at the front, communication vehicles, a command vehicle in the middle, the one that would be Krasnov's. He could see even at this distance that the column was moving with the casual confidence of a force that had already decided the outcome. They stopped about 800 meters out. A figure emerged from the lead vehicle, an officer heavily bundled with binoculars. He scanned the base for a long moment. Callahan raised his own binoculars. He watched the man watch him. "Davis," he said quietly without lowering the binoculars. "Sergeant, any read on their communications?" "They're transmitting. I can't crack it, but they're active." "Good. Let them talk." He watched the officer with the binoculars gesturing to someone behind him, pointing toward the base. "They're comfortable," Callahan said. "That's good and bad." "How is comfortable good?" Reyes asked. "Comfortable people make assumptions," Callahan said. "Assumptions get people killed." He had no idea in that moment how precisely he was describing what was about to happen. The lead vehicle started moving again at 0934. It had traveled less than 200 meters when the world changed. There was no sound first. That was the thing. None of them had anticipated the complete absence of the sound they had been conditioned to expect. In the movies and training and every engagement Callahan had ever heard described, there was always a sound before impact. A crack, a report, something that located the event in space and time and gave the world a moment to organize itself around the violence. There was no sound. The figure in the lead vehicle's open hatch, standing surveying, projecting command in every line of his posture, simply ceased to be upright. He folded. No dramatic fall, no cinematic slow motion. One instant he was there the way authority is there filling space, and the next instant the space was empty and he was gone below the hatch line and the vehicle rolled to a stop. The sound came later. 3 full seconds later, a single isolated flat crack that the wind immediately scattered in 4 directions, simultaneously stripping it of origin, of direction, of meaning. By the time the soldiers in the column could process what they'd heard, the sound was already meaningless, already dissolved into the storm. Callahan watched through his binoculars. The column had frozen, not withdrawn, not returned fire, not deployed, frozen. Every vehicle sat exactly where it had been when the sound arrived, as if the laws of momentum had been briefly suspended. He saw figures emerging from vehicles, looking at each other, looking at the mountains, looking at the sky. He saw radio operators pressing equipment against their ears, transmitting with the frantic urgency of people who need someone else to tell them what they just saw. He saw in the command vehicle in the middle of the column a window lower slightly, and behind that window, barely visible, even through the binoculars, a face he was certain was looking back at him with an expression he couldn't read at this distance, but understood instinctively. Confusion. Pure, clean, dangerous confusion. And behind Callahan Davis's voice came out very quietly, very carefully, as if speaking too loud might disturb the strange stillness that had settled over the mountain. "Sergeant, where did that shot come from?" Callahan lowered his binoculars. He looked at the empty space where Emily Carter's equipment case had been leaning against the wall that morning. He thought about sight lines. He thought about rooftops. He thought about a woman who asked questions about thermal differentials and wind direction and the gap between buildings that created a natural channel. "I don't know," he said. It was not for the first time that morning an honest answer. Inside the command vehicle, Colonel Victor Krasnov was doing something his officers had never seen him do before. He was sitting still. Krasnov was not a still man. He was a man of motion, of forward pressure, of constant decision-making, of the relentless forward momentum that had carried 31 vehicles up a mountain road through a blizzard because hesitation was a weakness he'd excised from his vocabulary years ago. His officers functioned because he functioned. His column moved because he moved. When Krasnov was in motion, everything was in motion. He sat completely still in the back of his command vehicle, and the stillness infected everything around him. Major Petrov was waiting for an order, for a direction, for the word that would restart the machine that had stopped so suddenly. He was a patient man by training, if not by nature, and he waited now with his hands folded and his face carefully neutral. "Who fired?" Krasnov said finally. "We don't know," Petrov said. "Direction. We can't." Petrov stopped, started again. The sound was the wind conditions are making acoustic location impossible. The storm is scattering. "I heard you," Krasnov said. "I'm asking you what you know, not what you can't do." "I know that Lieutenant Yegorov is dead," Petrov said. "I know that the shot came from an extreme range. The delay between impact and report was consistent with—" He hesitated. 3,000 meters or beyond. The vehicle was very quiet. 3,000 meters, Krasnov said. "At minimum. In a blizzard." "Yes, sir." Another silence. Outside, Krasnov could hear his men, their voices, tight and clipped, moving through the storm with the specific pitch of soldiers who have encountered something they don't have a category for. "How many shooters?" he asked. "Unknown." "Best estimate?" Petrov was quiet for a moment. "One," he said. "The shot pattern, singular impact, no secondary engagement. If there were multiple shooters at that range in these conditions, maintaining that kind of coordination would require—" "One," Krasnov repeated. "Possibly." Krasnov looked out the small window at the frozen column. His vehicles, his men, his plan, the clean, efficient, overwhelming force plan that had worked 3 times before and was supposed to work a 4th time today because the base was small and undermanned and had no communications and was running out of power. And those facts were not wrong. Those facts were still true. And yet somehow a man or something had put a single round through his lead officer's skull from beyond 3,000 meters through a blizzard with no warning and no trace. "What's in that base?" he said. 10 soldiers, degraded." "What is actually in that base," Krasnov said harder this time. "Not what the intelligence says. What is actually there." Petrov didn't answer because Petrov didn't know, and they both understood that not knowing was suddenly the most important fact on the mountain. Krasnov reached for his radio. "All units hold position," he said. The words came out measured, controlled. The voice of a man who understood that the most dangerous thing he could do right now was move. "Nobody advances, nobody withdraws. Hold position and wait for my order." He set the radio down. He looked at the mountains that surrounded the road, the slopes and ridgelines and elevation changes that he had barely glanced at when planning this operation, because they were background, they were scenery, they were the empty space between his column and his objective. They were not empty anymore. Somewhere up there in the white, in the wind, in the impossible distance, something was watching him. Something that had already demonstrated its reach, its precision, and most unsettling of all, its patience. It had waited until his lead officer was standing presenting the clearest possible target. It had waited until the column was committed to the road, past the last easy point of withdrawal. It had waited until the conditions were exactly right. That wasn't a soldier shooting. That was a plan executing. For the first time in a very long time, Viktor Krasnov felt the particular cold that had nothing to do with the blizzard. Callahan found the note at 10:03. It was under his coffee cup, which he was certain hadn't been there when he'd set the cup down that morning, which meant someone had placed it there after he'd started watching the column, which meant someone had been in the operations room, moving without sound, placing a note under his cup, while he stood 20 feet away and did not hear them. He picked it up, unfolded it. It was written in a precise, small hand, not the hasty scrawl of urgency, but the deliberate clarity of someone who had thought carefully about exactly what they needed to communicate. It said, "They will not move for the next 40 minutes. Do not fire. Do not transmit. Do not give them anything to locate. They are confused right now, and confused is what we need them to be. When they start moving again, I will handle the next phase. Trust the process." See, he read it twice, then he read it a third time because the third time he noticed the thing he'd missed in the first two. She didn't say, "if they start moving again." She said, "when." She already knew they would start moving again, which meant she already knew what she was going to do when they did. He folded the note and put it in his chest pocket. He looked around the operations room at his 9 remaining soldiers, all of them watching him with the particular attention of people who need their sergeant to know something. "Okay," he said. "New orders. Nobody fires. Nobody transmits. Nobody does anything that makes a sound louder than necessary. We sit tight, we stay dark, and we wait." "Wait for what?" Reyes asked. Callahan thought about the note, about the long case, about the questions about rooftops and wind direction and sight lines and thermal differentials. "We wait," he said, "for Corporal Carter to finish what she started." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Davis said very carefully, "Sergeant, what exactly is Corporal Carter?" Callahan looked at the empty space by the wall where the case had been. He thought about the shot that had come from nowhere, the 3-second delay, the way the sound had scattered and died in the storm with no direction, no origin, no trace. He thought about a field medic who knew things about elevation and thermal signatures and never looked at the mountains like someone who was afraid of heights. "I think," he said slowly, "that she's exactly what we needed her to be." Outside, the column remained frozen on the mountain road, and somewhere in the white and the wind and the impossible distance, Corporal Emily Carter was already preparing the next moment, the next word in the sentence she'd begun writing the instant they'd told her a column was coming. The base hadn't known it yet. Krasnov's column certainly hadn't known it, but the mountain already knew. The mountain had known since the moment she started asking questions about the wind. The note was still in Callahan's chest pocket at 10:41 when the column started moving again. Not all of it, just the front 3 vehicles probing the way a man tests ice before committing his full weight. Krasnov was being careful now. That was new. That was different from the column that had rolled up the mountain road 2 hours ago with the casual confidence of a force that already knew how the story ended. Callahan watched through the observation window and felt something he hadn't expected to feel: relief. Not because the situation had improved. By every measurable standard, it hadn't. 31 armored vehicles were still on his road. 80-plus soldiers were still out there in the storm. His generator was still burning through its last hours. His comms were still dead. But the column was being careful, and careful meant something had changed in their calculation. Something had introduced a variable they didn't have an answer for. He knew what the variable was. She was somewhere on this mountain with a lock-in case and a plan she hadn't fully explained to anyone. "They're moving," Davis said from the console. "I see it. 3 vehicles, slow." "I see it, Davis." "What do we do?" Callahan kept his eyes on the vehicles. "We do what the note said. We stay dark. We don't give them anything. And if they make it to the wire," he didn't answer that because he didn't have an answer that would help anyone. He had a sergeant's answer. "We hold, we fight, we make them pay for every foot." But that answer had a very clear ending that he wasn't ready to say out loud. Then the second shot happened. Same as the first, no warning, no sound preceding the impact. The lead vehicle in the probe stopped, and the figure in the open hatch crumpled forward over the metal rim and stayed there draped motionless while the vehicle beneath him continued rolling for another 6 feet before someone inside hit the brakes. 3 seconds later, the sound arrived. A single flat crack stripped of direction by the wind scattered across the mountain face like something thrown and broken. The 2 remaining probe vehicles reversed immediately, not carefully, urgently. They backed into the main column with enough speed that Callahan could hear the impact of metal on metal even through the wall and the storm. Someone was transmitting frantically on what Davis had identified as their tactical frequency, a voice pitched high and fast that didn't need translation to understand. "2 down," Reyes said from somewhere behind Callahan. His voice had a quality to it that Callahan recognized, not quite fear, not quite awe. The particular tone a person uses when reality has just revised itself in a direction they hadn't anticipated. "2 commanders," Callahan said quietly. "She's taking commanders." The room absorbed that for a moment. "She," Torres said, not a question, just the words settling into the space between them. "Corporal Carter," Callahan confirmed. He turned away from the window to face his people. 9 faces all looking at him with versions of the same expression, the one that said they were recalibrating everything they thought they knew about the last 6 days. "She's been planning this since before the column arrived. Possibly since before she got here." "That's," Reyes started. "I know," Callahan said. "She's a medic. She's something else too. And right now I'm very glad she is." He moved to the center of the room. "Listen to me, whatever she's doing out there, she's buying us time and she's buying us psychological ground. But she can't hold that column forever. So here's what we're going to do with the time she's giving us. Davis, you keep working that uplink. Every 60 seconds, I don't care how degraded the signal is, I don't care if you get 3 words through, you keep trying. Torres, I want a full inventory of everything we can use to make this base look more defended than it is. Anything that produces heat, anything that creates a visual signature. We want them guessing about our numbers. Reyes, take Martinez and reinforce the north wall access points. Not because I think they're coming that way, but because thinking about what we're doing keeps us from thinking about what we can't do. Move. His people moved. That was the thing about good soldiers, they moved, even when the situation was unclear, even when the math was bad, even when a corporal who was supposed to be a field medic was somewhere on a mountain doing something none of them could explain. They moved because moving was the only answer that didn't require certainty. Callahan looked back at the window. The column had pulled back 200 meters. He could see the vehicles rearranging, not retreating, repositioning. Krasnov was thinking. Krasnov was adjusting his plan. He pressed his hand flat against the cold wall and thought about a woman who asked about wind direction. He thought, whatever you're doing out there, Emily Carter, keep doing it. At 11:09 inside the command vehicle, Viktor Krasnov was having the worst conversation of his professional life. He was having it with himself, which was the only kind of conversation he trusted anymore. 2 officers, 2 shots. No muzzle flash identified by any of his vehicle optics. No acoustic signature that his sound-ranging equipment, which was supposed to locate artillery positions at 1,500 meters, could lock onto. The storm was doing something to the propagation pattern that his technical officer described as unprecedented interference, which was the professional way of saying that all their equipment was telling them nothing useful. 2 shots, 2 kills, 0 information. Petrov was standing at the other end of the vehicle with the expression of a man who was waiting to be told what to think. His other officers were outside managing the column's repositioning, keeping the men busy because busy men don't have time to be afraid. And his men were, he could see it beginning to be afraid. Fear was a disease in a column. It started at the front where the dead were and moved backward through radio chatter and sideways glances and the way men held their weapons when they weren't sure what they were supposed to be pointing them at. Options, Krasnov said. Petrov cleared his throat. Don't tell me what we can do. Tell me what actually works. Another throat clearing. Thermal imaging sweep. If there's a shooter at range, they'll have a heat signature. We have 2 vehicles in this storm in these temperatures. The equipment can compensate for ambient. The equipment, Krasnov said flatly, has been wrong about everything today. What else? Flanking teams. On foot using the ridge lines. If we put 4 men up the eastern slope and 4 up the western, and if the shooter relocates before they get into position, then we've at least narrowed the no. Krasnov stood up. The vehicle was small enough that standing made him the dominant physical presence in the space, which was what he needed right now, not for Petrov's benefit, but for his own. He needed to feel large. He needed to feel like the largest thing on this mountain. Here is the problem, Petrov. We are behaving reactively. We are solving the problem that already happened instead of shaping the problem that comes next. That is not how I win. Then how do we make them shoot again? Petrov went very still. We send a vehicle forward, Krasnov said. 1 vehicle. We instrument it, put the thermal arrays on maximum sensitivity position, the acoustic sensors at every angle. We don't put a man in the open hatch. We send it forward remotely if we have to, or we find a volunteer who understands the strategic value of what he's doing. He said strategic value, the way men say things when they mean something harder to say directly. Petrov understood. You want to draw the shot. I want to locate the shooter. The shot is the price. He sat back down. Find me a volunteer. Petrov left the vehicle without another word, which told Krasnov that Petrov disagreed but had calculated that disagreement was not currently survivable. That was fine. Disagreement was not what he needed from Petrov. He needed execution. He looked out the small window at the base on the ridge above him. 10 soldiers, degraded everything, a skeleton crew in a dying outpost on a mountain road in a blizzard. And one of them or something operating from among them had just killed 2 of his best officers from a distance that shouldn't have been possible. He picked up his thermal monocular and swept the ridgeline above the base, white and gray in the static of thermal noise from the storm. Nothing that resolved into a human shape. He swept it again slower this time, ridge by ridge, elevation by elevation. Still nothing, which meant either the shooter was using the terrain to mask their signature possible, if they knew exactly what they were doing, or they were somewhere so well concealed that even thermal couldn't find them. Both possibilities were concerning. One of them was terrifying. He lowered the monocular. What kind of soldier, he thought, operates alone at 3,200 meters in a blizzard and leaves no thermal trace? The answer was a very specific kind of soldier. A kind of soldier that was not supposed to be in a 10-person forward operating base on a mountain in the middle of nowhere. He pressed his radio. Petrov? Sir, pull the intelligence package on that base. Everything. Personnel rosters, assignment logs, supply manifests. I want to know every person who has been on that base in the last 30 days. A pause. Sir, that information was assessed as low priority given them pull it. Yes, sir. He set the radio down and sat very still in the command vehicle while the storm pushed against the walls and his men rearranged themselves outside in the patterns of soldiers who don't know what they're preparing for. Somewhere on that mountain was an answer. He was going to find it. Back inside the base, Emily Carter materialized in the operations room at 11:43. No warning, no sound of approach. One moment the doorway was empty, and the next moment she was standing in it, and 3 soldiers who were facing that direction all reacted with a specific physical jolt of people whose nervous systems had registered a presence before their brains caught up. She looked the same as she always looked. That was the thing that hit Callahan hardest. She looked exactly the same as she had at 0600 that morning, sitting at the far table with her coffee. Same composure, Same economy of expression. Like she'd stepped out for a walk, not spent the last 3 hours on a mountain in a blizzard, doing things that had stalled 31 armored vehicles. Her jacket had snow on it. That was the only physical evidence. Report, Callahan said. He said it like an order because it was, and because the word report created a framework. Military structured, reportable around something that currently had no framework. She crossed the room, poured herself coffee, turned around, and leaned against the counter. Column has pulled back to approximately 900 meters. They've repositioned into a defensive cluster, which means they've shifted from offensive mode to assessment mode. They're trying to figure out what they're dealing with. You took two more here. Officers, communications officer, and a tactical coordinator. The command structure of that column is currently operating at significantly reduced capacity. The room was very quiet. How many positions did you use? Callahan asked. 3. I moved after each shot. They have acoustic sensors on at least 2 of those vehicles. I could see the arrays. Every time I moved, they recalibrated. By the time they recalibrate, I'm already somewhere else. You could see their sensor arrays, Reyes said. He couldn't keep the disbelief out of his voice. From where? She looked at him levelly. From where I needed to be. That's not Reyes, Callahan said. Reyes stopped. Callahan looked at Carter. What's their next move? They're going to try to draw a shot. They'll send something forward, a vehicle, possibly a person, and instrument it with everything they have. They're going to try to triangulate my position from the next shot instead of the last one. She drank her coffee. It's the right call. I would do the same thing. So you don't shoot. I don't shoot at what they send forward. She set her cup down. I shoot at something they didn't plan for. What does that mean? For the first time since she'd walked through the door, something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. More like the look a chess player gets when the board has finally reached the position they have been building toward for 20 moves. It means, she said, that I've been watching their column arrangement. Their communications vehicle is the 3rd unit from the rear. It's been stationary since they repositioned, which means whoever is operating it doesn't understand that stationary is visible. If I remove their communications capability entirely, the column becomes 31 isolated units that cannot coordinate. Each vehicle commander makes individual decisions. Individual decisions in a high-stress, unknown threat environment produce paralysis, not action. Davis had turned completely around from his console. He was staring at her with the expression of a man watching someone solve a problem he didn't know was a problem. You're not trying to destroy them, Callahan said slowly. No, you're trying to isolate them, confuse them, make them feel that advancing is more dangerous than staying still. She picked up her coffee again. A column that won't move is a column that isn't threatening you. I don't need to defeat 31 vehicles. I need to convince 31 vehicles that the cost of moving is too high to pay. The silence stretched out. Torres, who had been listening from the fuel station, said quietly, That's actually brilliant. It's geometry, she said, and psychology, mostly psychology. Callahan looked at her for a long moment. All the questions he'd been collecting for 6 days were stacked up inside him. Who she was, what she actually was, what the long case actually contained, who had sent her here, and why, and whether any of it was coincidence, or whether this entire situation had been anticipated by someone who thought several moves ahead of everyone else in the room. He picked one question, the one that mattered most right now. How long can you hold them? She considered it genuinely, which he appreciated. She didn't give him a reassuring answer. She gave him a real one. As long as they keep making predictable decisions, she said. The moment Krasnov does something, I haven't planned for the equation changes. And what's the thing you haven't planned for? She looked at him steadily. He deploys aerial surveillance. A drone with thermal imaging and a tight search pattern over the ridgelines will find me eventually. Da mama, even if I minimize my signature. Ground level I can manage. Aerial is harder. How much harder? Significantly. Do they have drones? The intelligence package suggests 2 recon units on the supply vehicle. Whether they deploy them in these wind conditions is a commander's judgment call. She paused. I'd like to destroy the supply vehicle before he makes that call. Callahan stared at her. The supply vehicle, he repeated. 3rd from the rear on the eastern side. If the drone equipment is disabled on the ground, aerial surveillance becomes a non-option regardless of conditions. He thought about what she was describing. She had been watching that column for hours. She had cataloged vehicle positions, identified sensor arrays, located communications equipment, and already identified the supply vehicle carrying their drone assets, all from positions she'd moved between without detection in a blizzard alone while engaging targets at ranges that shouldn't have been possible. He thought about the note under his coffee cup, the precise handwriting, the calm instruction to trust the process. "What do you need from me?" he said. 12 minutes, she said, "and then I need you to do something that's going to feel wrong." "What?" "I need you to transmit, loud and clear on an open frequency. I need Krasnov to hear your voice." "That'll give away our position." "He already knows your position. He needs to think you're the threat." She stood up straight, picked up the long case from where she'd set it against the wall. He hadn't even seen her bring it in, which said something about the state of his situational awareness around this woman. "While he's listening to you, he won't be listening to the mountain." She walked toward the door. "Carter," Callahan said. She stopped. "When this is over," he said, "you're going to tell me everything." She turned just enough to look at him over her shoulder. "When this is over, Sergeant, you'll already know everything that matters." Then she was gone again, and the doorway was empty, and the operations room held the specific silence of 9 soldiers who had just understood that they were not as they had believed the main characters in this particular story. Davis turned back to his console. His hands were moving before Callahan could say anything. "I'm keeping the uplink open," Davis said, "in case she needs comms for something she hasn't told us about yet." "Good thinking," Callahan said. "Should I be scared of her?" Reyes asked, not entirely joking. "No," Callahan said. He moved to his position at the observation window. The column was still out there, still reorganizing, still dark and heavy and overwhelming in its size and its numbers and its firepower. Still not moving. "You should be grateful," he said. At 12:11, Krasnov's volunteer, a young corporal named Dmitry Volkov, who had agreed to the forward probe because he was 22 years old and hadn't yet accumulated enough experience to properly evaluate danger, climbed into the driver's seat of the lead vehicle and began moving forward at 8 kilometers per hour. Every sensor on Krasnov's available equipment was active. Thermal arrays on maximum sensitivity. Acoustic positioning units calibrated and recording. 2 officers monitoring screens in the command vehicle, hands-on logging equipment, ready to capture the directional data from the shot the moment it came. Krasnov watched. His hands were folded in his lap. He was very still again. The vehicle moved. 50 meters. 100. The road was clear. The storm pushed at it from the north, rocking it slightly. 150 meters. Nothing. "She's not taking the shot," Petrov said. "I know," Krasnov said. "Then our plan is only useful if she responds to it on our terms." He picked up his thermal monocular and swept not toward the base, but along the ridgelines to the east. "She's too good to shoot at a trap, so she's doing something else while we run the trap." He swept west. Nothing. He swept east again, slower, lower, checking angles he'd dismissed earlier because they were tactically inefficient approaches that a rational shooter wouldn't. He stopped. On the eastern ridge, at an angle that required a shooter to be positioned almost perpendicular to the column's axis, an angle that provided no direct line to the advancing probe vehicle, but an excellent line to the rear of the formation, there was a shape, barely, at the edge of thermal resolution, at the limit of what the monocular could distinguish from background. It was horizontal, low, almost flat against the surface. It was warm, and it was aimed at the rear of his column. All units rear defensive. The supply vehicle disappeared. Not a dramatic explosion. A single penetrating shot through the engine compartment that produced a sharp crack and a bloom of heat on his monocular, and then the supply vehicle was dark and stopped and done. And with it, he knew before he confirmed it, the drone deployment capability that was supposed to solve his surveillance problem. The shot had come from exactly where his probe vehicle was not. Krasnov lowered the monocular. He sat in the command vehicle on the mountain road in the blizzard, and he felt the shape of the problem change around him. Like a room he'd thought he understood, suddenly had a new wall he hadn't seen. The geometry was wrong. The geometry had been wrong since the first shot, and every move he'd made to correct it had simply revealed another dimension of wrongness. There was someone on this mountain who understood this battlefield better than he did. Not 10 exhausted soldiers and a dying base. One person, one specific, deliberate, relentlessly prepared person who had been ready for this before the column even left the valley. He pressed his radio. Petrov, get me the personnel files on that base. Everything. Now. I'm still pulling. Petrov. His voice was flat, level. The voice of a man who has arrived at a conclusion he doesn't like, but will not look away from. Someone on that mountain has been planning this engagement longer than we have. I need to know who it is. Static. Then, yes, sir. Pulling now. Krasnov set the radio down and sat with the weight of what he'd just said. Someone had been planning this longer than they had. Somewhere in that thought was a truth that changed everything, and he couldn't afford to not understand it. In the base, Callahan heard the distant, flat crack of the fourth shot and closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. 4 shots. 4 kills or critical hits. 0 visual confirmation of position from the enemy. He knew this because Davis had managed a partial intercept of the enemy tactical frequency, fragmented, mostly noise, but enough to catch the specific quality of voices that have lost their confidence. He opened his eyes. Davis, give me an open frequency. I'm going to talk to them. Davis looked up. Sir, she said to transmit, loud and clear, give them something to listen to. He straightened his jacket, squared his shoulders. Let's give them something worth hearing. Davis found the frequency and nodded. Callahan keyed the radio and spoke in the clear, measured voice of a man who is not under any circumstances afraid. Attention, unidentified armored column on Sector 7 Access Road. This is Staff Sergeant Mark Callahan, United States Army. You are currently in contact with a prepared defensive force. You have sustained casualties at extreme range from multiple positions. Your communications capability has been assessed and reduced. I am inviting your commander to reconsider his current operational posture. He paused. This base is not what you were told it was. He released the key. The frequency was silent for a long moment. Then in accented but precise English, a voice came back that Callahan knew immediately was Krasnov. Not because he recognized it, because it had the specific weight of a man who was not used to being in the position he was currently in. Sergeant Callahan, I would like to understand what I am dealing with. Callahan looked at the empty place where Emily Carter's case had been. He almost smiled. No, he said. You wouldn't. Krasnov did not respond immediately to Callahan's last transmission. That silence lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Davis counted it because Davis was the kind of man who needed numbers when everything else felt unstable, and 4 minutes and 17 seconds of silence on an open military frequency from a column commander who had just lost 4 officers and his drone capability was not nothing. That silence was a man thinking hard. That silence was a man revising. Callahan sat with the radio in his hand and waited and did not fill the silence with anything because he understood instinctively that the silence was working for him. At 12:23, Krasnov came back. Sergeant Callahan. The voice was controlled, professionally controlled, the kind that takes years to build, the kind that doesn't reveal anything except the effort it takes to reveal nothing. You said this base is not what I was told it was. I agree with that assessment. So tell me what it is. Callahan looked at Torres, who was watching him with wide eyes. He looked at Davis, who had his headset half on and was monitoring the enemy tactical frequencies simultaneously. He looked at the doorway still empty, still holding the absence of Emily Carter like a held breath. It's a base that's still standing, Callahan said into the radio. That's what it is right now. That's the only thing that matters right now. Another silence, shorter this time. 4 of my officers are dead, Sergeant. I know. You have 10 soldiers. That's what my paperwork says. A pause that felt different from the others, not calculating, but something closer to recognition. Like a man hearing a sentence that confirms a suspicion he didn't want confirmed. Who else is in that base? Krasnov said. Callahan set the radio down without answering. Davis pulled off his headset and looked up. He's going to know we're stalling. He already knows we're stalling, Callahan said. Let him know it. Stalling is information too. It tells him we have something worth stalling for. He stood up. What's the column doing? Still static, but I'm picking up movement on foot. Small groups looks like they're spreading out along the tree line on both flanks. Not advancing, repositioning. Flanking teams, Callahan said. She predicted that. He pressed his radio. Carter, if you can hear this, they're putting flankers in the trio line east and west. Over. Static. No response. He hadn't expected one, but he felt better for saying it. Torres raised his hand. Generators down to 4 hours, maybe less. The cold is pulling more load than I calculated. Noted. Callahan moved to the window. Through the storm, he could make out the column's repositioned bulk vehicles spread wider now. No longer stacked road column style, but fanned into a broader formation that reduced their vulnerability to a single firing position. Krasnov was adapting. He was doing exactly what a good commander does when a situation refuses to behave like a situation is supposed to behave. He was changing the shape of the problem. The question was whether Emily Carter had already changed the shape of the answer. She had. At 12:31, the fifth shot came. Callahan heard it differently from the previous four. Not the flat crack carried by the wind, but the sound of something hitting metal at extreme velocity, the specific hard ring of a round finding a vehicle's communication array. Through the binoculars, he watched the eastern flank command vehicle's roof-mounted antenna assembly come apart. Not explode, disintegrate, the components separating and falling away with the clean efficiency of something that had been precisely unmade. The vehicle was still running, no one was hurt. But whatever that antenna had been connecting to was now connecting to nothing, and the vehicle that carried it went immediately and visibly silent. No more transmissions on the frequency Davis was monitoring, no more positional chatter, just a dead channel where a voice used to be. The flanking teams in the eastern tree line stopped moving. Davis had his headset on, listening hard. They're confused. Eastern element is asking for orders and not getting a response. They're wait. He pressed the headset tighter. They're going back. The eastern flankers are pulling back to the main column. Because they lost their local command link, Callahan said. Without that antenna, they can't coordinate the flanking movement. She didn't kill anyone. She pulled the eastern flank back without firing at a single person. The room processed that. Reyes said slowly, she's not trying to kill them. She's trying to rearrange them. Control them, Callahan corrected. There's a difference. He was beginning to understand what she'd meant the night before when she'd said the objective was not destruction, but control. He'd heard the word and understood it intellectually. Now he was watching it in real time, and the intellectual understanding was becoming something larger and harder to contain, the specific vertigo of watching someone operate at a level of precision you'd never seen before and might not see again. She was playing the battlefield like an instrument, not striking it, playing it. At 12:48, Krasnov reorganized his western flankers and pushed them deeper into the tree cover. 6 men. Callahan could track them only intermittently through the binoculars, shapes moving through the storm, using the trees for concealment, working their way up the slope in a wide arc that would bring them around the base's blind side if they went far enough and fast enough. He keyed his radio. All positions, we have western flankers at approximately 200 meters moving north. Eyes on the back wall. He looked at his 9 people. 9 against 6 flankers, plus 30 armored vehicles, plus whatever Krasnov had planned next. 9 people who had been awake too long and were cold and running on borrowed generator power, and whatever psychological fuel comes from watching one person hold an army, still with a rifle, and geometry, and something that went beyond both. They won't make it, Reyes said, and he said it with a certainty that surprised even himself. You don't know that, Martinez said. She'll see them before we do, Reyes said. She already knows they're there. She knew they were coming before they moved. He looked at Callahan. Right, that's what she does. She already knows. Callahan looked at him for a moment. Yeah, he said, I think that's what she does. He was right. At 12:54, the 6th shot. Not at the flankers. That was the thing, that was the detail that would take Callahan days to fully process after the fact. She didn't shoot at the flankers. She shot past them at the vehicle in the main column that was providing their navigational guidance, a smaller unit with a rooftop-mounted system that fed positional data to the foot teams through their personal receivers. When that system went dark, the 6 men in the western tree line lost their GPS synchronization simultaneously. They had their own eyes, they had their own legs, but they'd been navigating in a whiteout blizzard on an unfamiliar mountain slope using electronic guidance. And when the guidance cut out, they stopped. And when they stopped, they looked at each other, and when they looked at each other, they all had the same question on their faces, and none of them had the answer. Davis was almost excited, which was remarkable given the circumstances. Western Element has halted. They're requesting positional confirmation and getting no response. Their nav system is down. He looked up from the console. She targeted their navigation equipment from a position where she couldn't see the flankers directly. She reverse mapped their equipment location from their movement pattern. Nobody said anything. She watched how they were moving, Davis said, still processing it out loud, figured out what equipment they were using, found that equipment on the vehicle providing it, and destroyed the equipment without being able to see the men she was protecting against. She protected us from a flanking movement without ever looking at the people flanking us. Callahan sat down. He hadn't meant to sit down. It wasn't a choice so much as his legs making a decision independent of his authority. He sat down in the chair at the operations table and put both hands flat on the surface and breathed. "Davis," he said, "Sergeant, keep monitoring. Tell me the moment anything changes in the column." "Yes, Sergeant." He sat there with his hands on the table and thought about a woman who had arrived at this base 6 days ago with a locked case and a field medic classification and questions about wind direction. And he thought about all the things he hadn't asked because the orders said not to ask, and he thought that maybe the orders knew something he hadn't. At 13:09, Krasnov did the thing Callahan had been dreading. He called for consolidation. All units, including the flanking teams, pulled back into the main formation. The column tightened vehicles, closing gaps, men returning from the tree line and climbing back into their carriers. It looked from the observation window like a retreat. It wasn't a retreat. "He's resetting," Callahan said. He felt it in his stomach before he could articulate it. He's pulling everyone in because he's going to try something completely different. He's done reacting to her. He's going to try to make her react to him. Davis was listening to the tactical frequency hard. His face changed. "Sergeant," he said, "they're talking about a mass advance. All vehicles simultaneous. Everything forward at once." The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. A mass advance. 31 vehicles moving simultaneously on a wide front to the degree the road allowed. No more probing, no more flanking, just overwhelming mass moving forward, daring the single shooter to stop all of it at once when she'd been carefully managing one engagement at a time. It was the right call. It was what Callahan would have done. Flood the zone, create more targets than she could service. Force her to choose what to protect and what to sacrifice. He grabbed his radio. "Carter, if you're monitoring, they're going mass advance. All vehicles. I don't know when, but it's coming. Over." Static. "Carter." Static. Torres said quietly, "Maybe she's already repositioned. Maybe she can't." The 7th shot came at 13:17, and the 8th at 13:17 and 14 seconds, and the 9th at 13:17 and 31 seconds. 3 shots in 31 seconds. 3 different vehicles at the front of the formation, each one the vehicle that would have been the point of the mass advanced the lead units, the ones that dictated speed and direction for everything behind them. Each one took a hit that wasn't fatal to the vehicle, but was immediately disabling in the specific way that disabled a vehicle's ability to lead anything anywhere. The first lost its front drive assembly. The second took a round through the transmission housing. The third, and Davis reported this with a voice that had gone completely flat beyond disbelief into something that functioned like calm, had its steering column destroyed by a shot that entered through the front grille at an angle that should not have been achievable from any position they had on the mountain. 3 shots, 31 seconds, 3 lead vehicles disabled without a single casualty. The mass advance never happened. The column sat on the road and did not move because the vehicles it needed to move behind were no longer capable of moving and reorganizing around them. In these conditions on this road would take time that felt, given what had happened in the last 31 seconds, like time they could not afford to spend exposed. Inside the command vehicle, Petrov watched Krasnov and said nothing because there was nothing to say. Krasnov stared at the instrument panel in front of him for a long time. His hands were folded in his lap. His breathing was controlled. Everything about him was controlled in the way of a man who has decided that control is the only thing he has left, and he will not surrender it regardless of what the mountain does to him. 3 shots, he said finally. 31 seconds. "Yes, sir." 3 different firing positions. Petrov hesitated. "Or one position with extremely rapid lateral movement between shots. The acoustics are too degraded to—" "One shooter," Krasnov said. One, because if it were multiple, they would have coordinated to hit personnel, not equipment. Multiple shooters optimize for casualties. A single shooter optimizes for effect. Everything that has been hit today has been chosen for maximum effect with minimum commitment. He unfolded his hands, folded them again. Equipment, not people. Communications, not vehicles. Navigation, not lives. Every target selected to stop movement without creating martyrs. He looked at Petrov. This person does not want us dead. They want us stopped. Petrov absorbed that. Does it matter? The result is the same. The result is not the same, Krasnov said with more force than he'd used in hours. A force that kills my men commits to a kind of engagement. A force that stops my men without killing them is making a statement. They are telling me something. He picked up the thermal monocular. They are telling me that I don't have to die on this mountain. I just have to not move. He said it like a man arriving at a theological conclusion, the kind of arrival that changes the ground you're standing on. Sir, Petrov said carefully, are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything yet. He raised the monocular, swept the ridge. I'm thinking. In the base at 1334, Emily Carter came through the door again. This time Callahan was ready. He'd been ready since the third shot of the 31-second sequence, which was when he'd stopped being surprised by her and started simply waiting for what came next, the way you wait after lightning for the thunder you know is coming. She looked the same. Snow on the jacket, hands steady, coffee before anything else. 9 shots, Callahan said. Yes, 3 and 31 seconds. The window was narrow. The mass advance was going to trigger in about 4 minutes. I needed to close that option before it opened. You move between positions and he did the math. In 14 seconds, between the first and second shot, 12 actually, I prepositioned. She sat down. For the first time, he noticed she was slightly out of breath. Barely the kind of almost nothing that you'd miss if you weren't watching for it specifically. But it was there, and seeing it made him feel something he hadn't expected. Not relief that she was human, but something closer to respect, the specific kind that comes from watching someone push themselves past where they thought they could go. Are you hurt? He said. She looked up from her coffee. Something in her expression shifted just slightly, like a door moving a centimeter. No, well, are you sure? Yes, he believed her because she was not a person who said things she didn't mean. What's next, he said. They're reassessing. Krasnov is smart. He's figured out that I'm not trying to kill his people, which means he knows the engagement has different rules than he thought. That's going to change his calculus. She set down her coffee. He has 2 options now. He can attempt a full withdrawal, cut his losses, and go back down the mountain. Or he can escalate beyond what I can manage alone. What does escalating beyond what you can manage look like? Artillery from the valley, air support if he can get authorization. She paused. Or he sends every man he has on foot into the mountains simultaneously on every axis and accepts whatever casualties I can inflict while they close the distance. At some point, I can't maintain accuracy against enough moving targets. How many moving targets can you maintain accuracy against? She looked at him directly. More than you'd think, but not 80. The number sat in the room. So, Callahan said, we need his artillery and air options to not be available, and we need his 80 men to not all be willing to walk into a mountain towards something they can't see. Yes. How do we achieve that? She stood up. She walked to the window, not to look out, he realized, but to think. She stood with her back to the room and her hands at her sides, and her weight evenly distributed, and she thought, and the room waited, because they had all collectively understood by now that waiting for Emily Carter to finish thinking was productive in a way that talking was not. His artillery option requires his communications to reach the Valley Command, she said finally. His comms are degraded but not destroyed. If I take the last working long-range transmitter on that column, he can't call for artillery without abandoning his position to find a signal. She turned around, and his men won't walk into a mountain voluntarily if the mountain has already demonstrated that it knows where they are before they get there. The Western flankers, Callahan said, when you hit their navigation equipment, they didn't know how you knew where to hit. They just knew you knew. Soldiers are rational, she said. When the math says moving costs more than staying still, most soldiers stop moving. Not all, but most. She picked up her case. I need 20 minutes. And then I need you to talk to Krasnov again. What do I say? She thought about it. Tell him you're willing to discuss terms. Don't offer anything. Just keep him on the radio. Keep his attention on you. She moved toward the door. And Sergeant, yeah. The long-range transmitter is on the command vehicle. When I take it out, he's going to know I've been listening to everything he's transmitted. He's going to know the level of intelligence I've been building on his column since before he arrived. She said this without drama, without emphasis. He might not take that well. Callahan absorbed that. Is that a problem? She looked at him with the closest thing to warmth she'd shown all day. It means he's going to stop being careful, and that's exactly what I need him to do. Then she was gone. Davis spun his chair around immediately. She's been tracking their transmissions the whole time. She's been mapping their entire order of battle from their own radio traffic. I know, Callahan said. Davis searched for the word. That's collection. That's intelligence collection. That's not something a field medic, Davis. Right, sorry. Davis turned back to his console, turned back again. Sergeant, who is she? Callahan thought about the long case, about the orders that said not to ask, about the note under the coffee cup, about 3 shots in 31 seconds, in 12-second repositioning, and questions about thermal differentials. He thought about what she'd said on day 1, show him, long conditions require long preparation. She's the reason we're still here, he said. That's enough. At 14:01, Krasnov's last long-range antenna array came apart with a 10th shot. Clean, precise. The communications vehicle it was mounted on was still operational, still running, but its ability to reach anything beyond the immediate tactical formation was gone. And Krasnov knew it the instant it happened because the confirmation channel he'd been monitoring went silent, in the specific way that means not out of range, but out of existence. He sat in the command vehicle, in the silence of a man who has been checkmated, but has not yet said the word. Petrov was looking at him. All his remaining officers were in their various vehicles, looking toward the command unit and waiting. Krasnov's radio crackled. Callahan's voice came through steady as a road. Colonel Krasnov, I told you this base wasn't what you were told it was. I think you understand that now. I'm willing to talk about how this ends without any more of your people getting hurt. Krasnov picked up his radio. He was aware in a way he hadn't been an hour ago that whoever was on that mountain had just demonstrated the ability to destroy his communications before he could use them, which meant they had been listening to everything, which meant they had known about the mass advance before he ordered it, which meant the 3 shots in 31 seconds weren't responsive, they were anticipatory. They had known. He pressed the transmit key. Sergeant Callahan. He kept his voice level, kept it professional. I would like to speak to whoever is actually running your defense. A pause, then Callahan's voice came back, and it had something in it that Krasnov recognized as genuine. So would I, Callahan said. She's a little busy right now. Krasnov lowered the radio. She. He sat with that word for a long moment, and in the sitting with it, he felt the last of his assumptions about this situation dissolve into something he could not yet name, but would later in quieter circumstances call humility. A woman. One woman. On a mountain in a blizzard with a rifle and a plan that was apparently more complete, more detailed, and more architecturally sound than the plan he'd built 31 armored vehicles and 80 soldiers around. He looked at Petrov. Petrov looked back. Tell the men to hold position, Krasnov said. Sir, if we'd Tell them to hold, he said again. Nobody moves, nobody fires. We hold and we think. He set the radio down. Because whoever is on that mountain is already 10 moves ahead of us, and until I understand how that's possible, I am not sending my men into a problem I cannot solve. Outside in the storm, in the white, in the cold, in the impossible mountain silence, 10 shots had been fired. Not one man had died, and 31 armored vehicles sat on a mountain road that they had come to take by force and did not move, because something they could not see and could not find had made moving feel like the most dangerous thing they could possibly do. That was the moment, not any single shot, but this moment, this stillness, when the battle shifted entirely. Not in firepower, not in numbers, but in the place where all real battles are decided first, inside the minds of the men being fought. The hold lasted 19 minutes. Callahan counted them the way you count minutes when counting is the only thing keeping your hands from doing something they shouldn't. 19 minutes of a 31-vehicle armored column sitting on a mountain road in a blizzard, not advancing, not retreating, just existing in the specific suspended state of a force that has lost confidence in its own next move. He'd been in enough engagements to know that 19 minutes of enemy stillness was not a gift. It was a preparation. Krasnov was not a man who sat still because he'd given up. He sat still because he was building something in his head, a new architecture for the problem, a restructured approach that accounted for everything the last 4 hours had taught him. And everything the last 4 hours had taught him was considerable. At 14:22, Davis sat up straight. That specific movement, the sudden vertebral alignment of a man who has heard something significant in his headset, brought Callahan across the room before Davis could even turn around. "Talk to me," Callahan said. "They're transmitting on a frequency I hadn't been monitoring. Lower band they switched. It's degraded, but I can catch pieces." Davis was already working hands moving across the console with the practiced urgency of a man trying to catch water in a sieve. "They're talking about weight." His face changed. "Sergeant, they're talking about the personnel file." Krasnov pulled it. He pulled it and he found something. I can't get the specifics, but the tone of the transmission changed about 40 seconds in. Something in the file changed how they're thinking about this. Callahan looked at the doorway. Empty. He keyed his radio. "Carter, they pulled your file. Whatever's in it, they know. Over." Static. Carter respond. Static. He held the radio for a moment, then set it down. She was either repositioning or she already knew, and it didn't change her plan. He decided to assume the second option because the first option led to a place he wasn't ready to go. "What do we do?" Torres asked. He'd moved from the fuel monitor to the edge of the operations cluster, drawn in by the gravity of the conversation, the way everyone in the room had been gradually drawn in over the last hour. The fuel monitoring had become secondary. Everything had become secondary. They were all collectively watching a story unfold and understanding that they were minor characters in it, which was humbling and strange and somehow also fine. "We keep doing what we've been doing," Callahan said. "We stay dark, we stay ready, and we trust the process." "She said that," Reyes said. "Trust the process. That's what the note said." "Yeah. What if the process has a problem we don't know about?" Callahan looked at him. "Then she knows about it before we do. That's been true all day." He moved back to the window. "Keep working that frequency, Davis. I want to know the moment they start moving." At 14:38, Krasnov found out who Emily Carter was. It came through what remained of his intelligence channel, a fragmented but sufficiently complete transmission from the support element in the valley that had finally processed his request for a full personnel deep dive on every individual assigned to the American base in the last 60 days. Most of the files were routine: personnel records, assignment orders, qualification sheets, the kind of documentation that describes soldiers in the language of bureaucracy rank MOS, assignment history. Training completions. Emily Carter's file was not routine. It was in fact so far outside routine that Petrov read it twice before handing the printed transcript to Krasnov without a word, which was itself a form of communication. Petrov always had words, and the absence of them meant the document had taken them away. Krasnov read it once. That was enough. Field medic classification current. That part was accurate. What the classification didn't mention what required 2 levels of access clearance above what a standard personnel query should have returned was the attached supplemental record. 17 confirmed long-range engagements over 6 years. 3 separate theater deployments in support of special operations units that were not named in the document. A qualification score at the top of a program that was itself not named, only referenced by a designator code that Krasnov recognized from his own intelligence background as belonging to a capability development track that most governments officially denied running. The longest confirmed shot in the supplemental record was listed simply as 3,400 meters. Confirmed adverse conditions. Below that, a single line of administrative notation, the kind added by someone at a desk far from any mountain asset currently assigned cover classification. Standard medical embed. Full capability not to be disclosed to host unit without authorization from originating command. He set the document on his knee. Petrov was watching him. "She wasn't assigned to that base," Krasnov said. "Sir, she was assigned to this engagement. To us." He looked up. "Someone knew we were coming before we knew we were coming." She was pre-positioned. He said it slowly, the way you say something whose implications are still unfolding as the words leave your mouth. She didn't just plan the defense after receiving intelligence about the column. She was placed there to conduct this specific defense against this specific threat, which means whoever sent her knew the column was coming, Petrov finished, knew the column was coming, knew its composition, knew its route, and had enough lead time to position a specialist with full preparation. He picked up the document again, looked at it. We weren't the hunters today, Petrov. We were the target. The vehicle was very quiet. Outside, the column held its position on the road engines, idling men, waiting in the particular cold patience of soldiers who have been told to hold and are holding and are trying not to think too hard about why. What do we do? Petrov said. Krasnov didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about the supplemental record, about 17 engagements in 3 theater deployments and a qualification scored at the top of a program that didn't officially exist. He was thinking about 10 shots over the course of a morning, each one chosen not for maximum lethality, but for maximum effect, each one selected to produce a specific behavioral response from his column, like keys pressed in a particular order on an instrument. She had been playing them, not fighting them, playing them. We need to change the instrument, he said. Petrov waited. She has been operating in one mode all morning, precision engagement at extreme range. It's her strongest capability, and the terrain supports it. If we change the terrain she's operating in, we change the equation. He folded the document, placed it in his jacket pocket. We go to her, not with vehicles, not with flanking teams that she can redirect by destroying their navigation equipment from 2 ridgelines away. He paused. We send our best people directly into the base perimeter, on foot, in small teams from multiple directions simultaneously. Not to fight their soldiers, to find her. In this storm on foot. She's been operating in this storm on foot all day. Krasnov looked at the window. If she can do it, so can we. She knows this terrain. Our people don't. No, but she's one person. He pressed his radio. All unit commanders, this is Krasnov. I want your 4 best men on foot. Small gear, personal weapons only. We are going into that base on the ground. I will brief the approach. Stand by for coordinates. He released the key. Petrov said, Sir, if she's as good as this document says, then 12 men going in from 4 directions is a problem that even she has to solve differently than she's been solving it. He said it without heat, almost gently, and differently is all I need. Different changes, everything. In the base at 1447, the change in enemy activity registered on Davis's console as a shift in radio traffic pattern, shorter transmissions, more frequent the staccato rhythm of coordinated small unit movement rather than the broader command traffic of a vehicle column. Something's changing, Davis said. Callahan was already at his shoulder. What kind of traffic? Personal radios, shorter range. I think they're dismounting, going on foot. The word hit the room like a stone hitting still water, sending rings outward through every person present. Reyes stood up from his position. On foot in this, multiple teams, 4 frequencies active simultaneously, which means 4 separate elements. Davis was tracking fast hands moving. They're coming in from, I can't get directional from this, but 4 separate elements means they're splitting the approach. Callahan processed this in the 3 seconds he had before he needed to act on it. 4-foot teams, small, personal weapons, coming in from multiple directions simultaneously, which meant they weren't trying to overrun the base with firepower, they were trying to saturate the targeting problem. Give her too many moving elements to track too many close threats to manage from extreme range. Force her to either break position or allow them to close the distance to a range where her advantage collapsed. It was the right call. It was what he would have done 3 hours ago. He grabbed his radio. Carter, 4-foot teams, small units coming in from multiple directions. They're going to try to close distance and find you. This is different from the vehicle operation. They're coming specifically for you. Over. This time the static broke. Her voice came back low and close, like she was keeping her sound profile small. I know, I've been watching them dismount. A pause. I need you to listen carefully, Sergeant. Right now. Every person in the room stopped what they were doing. Tell me, Callahan said. I can manage 2 of the 4 teams from my current positioning. The northern and eastern approaches have sight lines I can work with. The western and southern approaches go through terrain that gives them cover I can't fully address from distance. Another pause, and in it, he could hear wind. Real wind, not the building's version of it, the actual open mountain wind that she was sitting in somewhere out there on the ridge. I need your people for the southern approach. 4 of them. Armed, positioned at the inner perimeter wall, southern section. They don't engage unless the team gets within 70 meters. If the team gets within 70 meters, that means I've been unable to redirect them from range, and your people need to hold that wall. Understood. What about the Western team? A beat, just one. The kind that means a person is deciding how much to tell you. I'll handle the Western team, she said, but I'm going to need about 8 minutes to reposition. During those 8 minutes, if the Western team moves fast, they could reach the outer wire. And if they reach the outer wire, then I'll be in a position to handle them when I get there. Her voice didn't change pitch or speed. Trust the process, Sergeant. She clicked off. Callahan turned to his people. Reyes Martinez, Torres Kim Southern Wall, inner perimeter. You hear anything within 70 meters on the southern approach, you hold, and you wait. You do not engage unless they are at the wire. Questions? No, Sergeant. 4 voices nearly simultaneous. Move. They moved. The operations room thinned out, and Callahan stood with Davis and 2 others in the diminished space and felt the particular quality of a situation that has compressed itself down to its essential components. No more maneuvering room, no more options in reserve, just the positions they held and the person on the mountain, and the 4 teams of enemy soldiers walking uphill into a blizzard because their commander had finally understood what he was dealing with and had responded correctly, which meant the next 8 minutes were going to be the hardest of the day. At 14:53, the northern team made contact with Emily's field of operation. Davis caught it first, a sudden silence on one of the 4-foot team frequencies, the specific silence that means a radio operator has stopped transmitting because something in the environment has made transmitting feel dangerous. The northern team had been communicating with their vehicle element every 90 seconds. At 14:53, they went silent. At 14:55, they were still silent. At 14:56, one of them transmitted a single word in a voice that had the controlled pitch of a soldier reporting something he doesn't have an adequate vocabulary for. Callahan didn't speak the language, but Davis did enough to get the operational meaning. He said, "We are not moving," Davis reported, and then the channel went quiet again. Not "we are stopped," not "we are under fire," "we are not moving." It was a statement, not a report. The specific phrasing of a man who has made a decision rather than received an order. Callahan had a sudden clear image of 4 soldiers on a northern slope in the wind, and the white who had encountered something, not a body, not a shot, but something that had communicated to them wordlessly and completely that the direction they were walking was a direction they should not continue walking. He didn't know what she'd shown them. He suspected he might never know. But whatever it was, the northern team was no longer a factor. 11 shots, he said, more to himself than to Davis. I haven't heard a shot, Davis said. Neither have I, Callahan said. That's the point. At 15:01, the Eastern team triggered the response he'd been waiting for. Not a shot, a sound, distance specific, the hard impact of something heavy and fast meeting something solid that didn't move. It came from the eastern ridge, carried by a gust that happened to be moving in exactly the right direction, and it lasted less than a second before the wind took it away. On Davis's console, the Eastern team's frequency went from active chatter to total silence in the space of 1 transmission. The difference between the Northern team going silent and the Eastern team going silent was the difference between men who chose not to move and men who could not move. Callahan had been in enough situations to hear it in the quality of the silence, if that made any sense. And it made sense to him now in the way that things make sense when you've stopped trying to apply normal frameworks to a situation that left normal behind before dawn. Eastern team is down, Davis said quietly. I can't confirm. They're down, Callahan said. Or they're so effectively suppressed that functionally they're down. Same outcome. He pressed his radio. Reyes, status on the southern approach. Nothing yet, Sergeant. We've got wind and white out here and nothing else. Hold. Holding. He checked his watch. 15:03. Carter had said 8 minutes for the western reposition. She'd had 8 minutes and 40 seconds. Either she was in position or she was still moving, and the western team was at the outer wire. He keyed the radio. Carter, Western team status, over. 15 seconds of static. Then her voice, and it was different. Not the controlled low tone of someone keeping their sound profile small. This was the voice of someone who had just stopped moving, was breathing slightly harder than normal, and was transmitting from a new position, while the details of that position were still settling around them. Western team has halted at the outer wire, she said. They found my marker. What marker? A beat. I left them something to think about at the wire, something that tells them clearly that the next step forward is a step I've already planned for. Her breathing was steadying as she spoke. They're reading it right now. Give them 90 seconds. What did you leave them? A message, she said, in their language. He almost asked what the message said. He decided he didn't need to know. He waited 90 seconds. He counted them. At second 87, Davis said, Western team frequency just went active. They're transmitting to the main column. He listened hard. Their sergeant, they're requesting permission to withdraw. The operations room absorbed that in silence. They're requesting permission to withdraw. Not reporting contact. Not calling for support. Requesting permission to go back down the mountain. 3 soldiers at the outer wire of an American base in a blizzard, having encountered a message written by a single person requesting permission to leave. Callahan sat down again. Same chair, same table, same 2 hands flat on the surface. Davis, he said. Sergeant, what's the Southern team doing? Davis checked his secondary monitor. They've stopped advancing. They're holding at about 120 meters from the southern wall. They're not transmitting. I don't know if they... Reyes's voice crackled over the radio. Sergeant, Southern team just stopped. They're standing still about 100 meters out. Nobody's moving. Nobody's shooting. They're just standing there. Hold your position, Callahan said. They look... Reyes paused, and in the pause was the sound of a man searching for the right word. They look confused, Sergeant, like they don't know what they're supposed to do next. Then let them be confused. Hold the wall and don't give them anything to react to. He sat with his hands on the table and thought about 4 teams that had gone up a mountain to find one person, and 1 team that had turned around, and 1 team that was standing still not knowing what to do, and 2 teams that were effectively no longer participants. Then his radio crackled with a voice he hadn't heard in over an hour. Krishnov. Not on the open frequency, on the frequency he'd been using for internal column communication, which Davis had been monitoring all day, which meant Krasnov either didn't know Davis was on that channel or had decided it didn't matter anymore. Based on what Krasnov said next, Callahan thought it was the second option. All elements, this is Krasnov. The voice was level, controlled. But underneath the control, there was something Callahan hadn't heard in it before, a quality he recognized from his own voice on days when the situation had exhausted not his body, but his certainty. All foot teams return to vehicles. All vehicles hold current position. No further advance. No further dismount operations without direct authorization from me. A pause. We are reassessing. Davis pulled off his headset and looked at Callahan with the expression of a man who has just watched something happen that he will describe to people for the rest of his life and still not fully capture. Did he just... Davis started. Yeah, Callahan said. All 4 teams, yeah. Davis sat back in his chair. He pressed both palms against his face, held them there for a moment, took them away. 12 men. He sent 12 of his best people up this mountain on foot, and she turned them all around without... He stopped. I didn't hear 12 shots. I heard 1 impact sound, and that was it. You heard one, Callahan said. You weren't hearing everything she was doing. What was she doing? He thought about it. About the northern team that chose not to move. About the message at the western wire. About the southern team standing confused in the snow 100 meters from the wall they'd been sent to breach. She was talking to them, he said. Different language than the radio, but she was talking to him. He stood up, and they listened. At 15:22, Emily Carter walked back into the operations room for the 3rd time that day. This time, several things were different. Davis stood up. That was the first thing Davis, who had barely looked up from his console for 6 hours, stood up when she walked through the door. It wasn't a conscious decision. It happened the way standing happens when someone enters a room, and the room understands at a level below deliberate thought that standing is the correct response. Reyes and Martinez, who had returned from the southern wall, were already standing. Torres, too. Carter stopped just inside the doorway and looked at the room full of standing soldiers and did something Callahan hadn't seen her do all day. Not a smile exactly. It was smaller than a smile, tighter the expression of someone who is moved, but has a specific relationship with showing it. Status, she said, because she was the kind of person who addressed situations before emotions. 4-foot teams recalled to vehicles, Callahan said. Column holding position at 900 meters. Krasnov has gone quiet on all monitored frequencies. Southern team withdrew about 6 minutes after you came inside. He paused. What did you leave at the Western Wire? She crossed to the coffee station, poured, turned around. Coordinates, she said. He waited. The coordinates of every position I used today. All 12 of them. She held her cup in both hands, marked with the firing line and the target solution for each shot, so they could see specifically what I'd been doing and from where. She looked at him steadily. I wanted them to understand the full picture, not just what they'd experienced, but the architecture of it. The room was completely quiet. You showed them your positions, Callahan said slowly. Past positions. I've moved beyond all of them. But you showed them. Because knowing what's already been done to you is more frightening than not knowing, she said. When they saw 12 documented positions surrounding their route of advance, 12 positions they'd walked past, driven past, been within range of all day without knowing the question, stopped being, what is she going to do next, and became, how did we survive what she's already done? She drank her coffee. Fear of the known is paralyzing. Fear of the unknown just makes people angry. I needed them paralyzed, not angry. Davis said very quietly, that's psychological warfare. That's mathematics, she said, human mathematics. Callahan looked at her for a long moment. He was a man of practical instincts and direct approaches, and he'd spent his career learning to read people to understand what they were underneath what they presented. He'd been reading Emily Carter for 6 days and had managed at best to read the margins. The actual text of who she was had remained out of focus, always slightly beyond the resolution his normal instruments could achieve. He was beginning to understand that this was not an accident. The drone, he said. You said earlier that aerial surveillance was your vulnerability. The supply vehicle is destroyed, but Krasnov has one remaining drone unit in his command vehicle, she said. Bought the supply vehicle. He kept one back, standard operational reserve. She set her cup down. I've known about it all day. And you didn't. Destroying it too early would have told him I knew about the reserve. I needed him to believe his aerial option was still available, so he'd delay deploying it while he tried everything else first. She looked at Callahan with the steady directness that was her most consistent quality. He's going to deploy it now. He has nothing left to try. The foot teams failed, his communications are degraded, his command structure has significant gaps, and he's been sitting on that road for over 3 hours. The drone is next. Within the next 20 minutes, he needs visibility he can't get from the ground. He's going to send it up. And when he does, the wind conditions are going to be a problem for him. Drone operations at altitude in a blizzard on a mountain produce handling difficulties that limit flight time and control range. She picked up her case. But even with handling difficulties, if he gets it airborne and over these ridgelines with thermal active, he has a reasonable chance of finding a heat signature. Yours. Yes, Callahan made himself ask the question directly. Can you shoot down a drone? She looked at him. Not the way someone looked at you when they're deciding whether to tell the truth. The way someone looks at you when they're deciding whether telling the truth will help or complicate. Under the right conditions, she said. What conditions? If I know the flight path, if it comes over a position I can prepare, if the wind does what I think it's going to do at this altitude in the next 20 minutes. That's a lot of ifs. Every shot I took today had ifs, she said. That's not the question. The question is whether the ifs are manageable. She picked up her jacket from the chair. These are manageable. She was halfway to the door when Callahan said, Carter. She stopped, turned enough to look at him. You were placed here before the column was confirmed, he said. You've been planning this since before any of us knew there was a column to plan for. He said it without accusation. Just the statement of a man laying out facts he's assembled. Which means whoever sent you, they didn't just know this column was coming. They knew this column was coming here. They knew the specific route, the specific timeline, the specific threat profile. She held his gaze. They let it come, he said. This whole operation, they let Krasnov move. They wanted him on this road. She was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. You're a good sergeant, Callahan, she said. You put things together fast. Am I right? Another 4 seconds. The column carries intelligence on 3 other operations, she said. Intelligence that, if it completes its mission and returns to its command element, gets used in ways that cost significantly more lives than this engagement. Her voice was still level, still controlled, but there was something in it that hadn't been there all day, not quite weight, but the acknowledgement of weight, the specific tone of someone who carries a thing they don't put down. It needed to not complete its mission, and the window was here on this mountain in this storm with these 10 people in this one position. She looked at him. Yes, you're right. He absorbed that, absorbed everything it meant, the 10 soldiers who'd been exhausted and scared and running on borrowed generator power, who hadn't known they were the stage set for an operation someone else had designed. The specific loneliness of being used without consent, the cold mathematics of whoever had made this decision. And then he thought about the column sitting on the road, about 12-foot soldiers going home down the mountain instead of breaching his wire, about 4 officers who were gone, but 80 men who were not because she'd spent all day not killing anyone she didn't have to. Okay, he said. She looked at him. Okay, he said again. Go handle the drone, and when you're done, we're going to finish that conversation. Something shifted in her expression. The door opened another centimeter. When I'm done, she said, I think you'll have earned it. She walked out. Davis watched the doorway, then he looked at Callahan. The whole operation was a setup. We were bait. We were a position, Callahan said. There's a difference. Is there? He thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. About whether the distinction held or whether it was just language doing the work of making something hard feel acceptable. We're still here, he said finally. That counts for something. He moved to the window. Outside across the road, Viktor Krasnov's 31 vehicles sat in the blizzard. From the command vehicle, something small and angular was emerging from a roof hatch, propellers spinning against the wind, fighting for altitude, beginning the climb toward the ridgeline. The drone was airborne. Callahan watched it rise into the white and felt the compressed urgency of a man watching a clock he can't read running toward a number he can't see. Somewhere on the mountain, Emily Carter was already watching it too. And she was already calculating the answer to a problem she'd known was coming since before breakfast. The drone climbed for 40 seconds before the wind found it. Callahan watched it through the observation window, a small angular shape fighting the gusts. Its stabilization system working visibly hard against the mountain air. It wasn't elegant, it was determined. That was Krasnov's signature on everything he did. Not elegant, determined. Davis was monitoring the drone's control frequency, which the vehicle element was transmitting on a band he'd located 20 minutes ago. It's airborne. They're pushing it northeast toward the upper ridgeline. Thermal imaging is active. They're sweeping. How long before it covers the primary positions? At this wind speed with the handling corrections, they're making 4 minutes, maybe 5. Callahan pressed his radio. Carter, drone is northeast of the column moving toward the upper ridge. Thermal active. You have approximately 4 minutes, over. No response. He hadn't expected one. She was either already in position or she was moving, and in either case, talking wasn't what she needed to be doing. He stood at the window and watched the drone fight the mountain and thought about all the things that had to go right in the next 4 minutes and how none of them were in his hands. That was the hardest part. Not the fear, not the cold, not the exhaustion or the generator ticking down or the 31 vehicles on the road. The hardest part was standing in a room with his hands empty while one person he'd known for 6 days carried the entire weight of the outcome on a mountain he couldn't see clearly. Torres appeared at his shoulder. Generators at 2 hours, Sergeant. Maybe less. Noted. If we lose power, we lose the console. Davis loses the monitoring capability. I know, Torres. I'm just saying, I know. He turned to look at his soldier. Torres was 24 years old, had been awake for 37 hours, and had the eyes of a man who'd been doing math all day and didn't like any of the answers. Callahan put a hand on his shoulder briefly. 2 hours is enough. Whatever happens next happens in the next 30 minutes. Torres nodded. It wasn't a confident nod, but it was an honest one, which was better. At 1541, Davis sat forward so fast his headset cord pulled tight. The drone is changing direction. It turns south. They're bringing it around toward the base perimeter. They found something. I don't know. The control inputs are they're working hard. The pilot is compensating for something. He listened with his whole body the way people listen when the information is almost but not quite within reach. Wait, the frequency just spiked. Someone in the command vehicle is talking loud. I can't. He pressed the headset. Sergeant, I think they spotted a heat signature. Callahan's chest tightened. Where northern slope, upper section. They're bringing the drone around fast. He grabbed his radio. Carter. The 11th shot came before his thumb released the transmit key. Not a crack this time. A different sound, sharper, higher, with a metallic dimension that the previous shots hadn't carried. The sound of a round meeting something that wasn't designed to stop rounds, something light and precise, and full of components that did not survive the meeting. On Davis's console, the drone control frequency flatlined. Complete silence. No static, no fragments, just the specific absence of a signal that had been present then was not. Davis stared at the screen. He turned slowly to look at Callahan. His mouth was open slightly in the expression of a man whose brain has received information it hasn't fully processed yet. She shot it down, he said. Yes, Callahan said. Out of the air. Yes. In a blizzard. Davis. Right. Davis turned back to the console. His hands were moving before the rest of him caught up. Right, okay, monitoring. Reyes was at the operations room door, having heard the distinct shot sound from the southern quarter. Was that drone is down, Callahan said. Reyes stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he said very quietly, Is there anything this woman cannot do? It wasn't really a question. Callahan didn't treat it like one. In the command vehicle, Krasnov watched his pilot's screen go dark and said nothing for a long time. The pilot was still working the controls, the reflexive denial of a man whose instrument has stopped responding, but whose hands haven't received the message yet. After about 10 seconds, the pilot set the controller down and looked at Krasnov with the specific expression of someone delivering news they didn't generate. It's gone, sir. I know, Krasnov said. Petrov was already speaking before Krasnov could continue. Sir, we have to consider. I'm considering, Krasnov said. The men are. I know what the men are. He said it without sharpness. Just the flat accuracy of a man who has been in enough situations to know exactly what soldiers sound like, feel like carrying their bodies, when a day has gone this particular kind of wrong. He'd felt it himself hours ago when the first shot had come with no direction and no source and no explanation. His men had been feeling it since then, accumulating it in the specific way that compounds interest. Every additional inexplicable event, adding to the weight of everything that came before, until the weight became the primary operational condition. He thought about the document in his jacket pocket, the supplemental record. 17 engagements, 3,400 meters confirmed, a program that didn't have a name. He thought about 12 shots and one downed drone and not a single one of his men dead, except the 4 officers taken in the first hours, when he'd still been certain about how this was going to go. She hadn't killed his men. She'd had the capability and the opportunity and the positioning to take significant casualties from his column all day, and she hadn't. She'd taken communications, equipment, mobility, command structure. She'd taken everything that made his force a coordinated threat and left the men themselves unharmed. That was a choice, not a limitation, a deliberate, maintained, consistent choice across 11 separate engagements over nearly 7 hours. He understood finally and completely what Callahan had meant on the radio. You wouldn't want to understand what you're dealing with. He was right. It was not a comfortable thing to understand. Krasnov picked up his radio. At 15:48 inside the base, Davis grabbed Callahan's arm. He'd never grabbed Callahan's arm before. In 6 days of shared space and increasing stress, Davis had maintained the precise physical deference of a junior soldier to a sergeant, which meant hands to himself regardless of circumstances. The arm grab was new. The arm grab said that what he'd just heard overrode protocol. He's transmitting to the Valley Command, Davis said. His voice was low and fast and completely stripped of anything except the information. He got a signal out. There's a relay point they've been holding in reserve, lower on the mountain, some kind of portable unit they just activated. I've got maybe 30 seconds before I lose it. He was already recording, already logging, hands moving with the efficiency of a man who knows he's carrying something important and cannot drop it. He's reporting, he's telling them the operation is compromised. He's telling them the road is defended beyond their operational parameters. A pause, his face changed. Sergeant, he's requesting authorization for tactical air support. The room went cold. Callahan moved to the console in 2 steps. Can they get authorization? I don't know. I don't know their command structure. I don't know their authorization chain. How long would air support take to arrive? From the valley staging in this weather, Davis was calculating. Minimum 40 minutes, probably longer. The ceiling is... But they could get it. They could request it. Callahan straightened up. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, not because anything was on the ceiling, but because sometimes looking up is the physical gesture the mind needs when it's working a problem that doesn't have an obvious face. Tactical air support changed everything. Not because air support in a blizzard was easy or efficient or certain, it wasn't any of those things, but because air support meant the equation left the mountain entirely. It meant this stopped being a problem that one person on a ridgeline could solve with geometry and psychology. It meant the conversation became one that 10 soldiers and a sniper, however extraordinary, could not have. He pressed his radio. Carter, they have a relay unit active on the lower mountain. They've made contact with Valley Command and requested air support. Authorization unknown. Time to arrival minimum 40 minutes. Over. He released the key and waited. 14 seconds of silence. Then her voice came back, and it was different from any version he'd heard all day. Not strained, not urgent, different in a way that took him a moment to identify, and when he identified it, he felt the specific chill of a situation stepping onto new ground. She sounded focused, not the settled, prepared focus of someone executing a plan, the sharp, narrowed focus of someone who has encountered the edge of what they planned for and is calculating past it in real time. I heard them activate the relay, she said. I've been watching that position for 2 hours. You knew about the relay unit. I knew they had one. I didn't know when they'd use it. A pause. The relay is on foot with 2 operators on the southwestern slope. They're exposed. I can reach the unit. Another pause longer. But taking out their communication relay after they have already transmitted the air support request doesn't cancel the request. It just means they can't confirm or provide updated targeting coordinates. What does that do to the air support timeline? It creates a window. If their air asset arrives and can't get updated target coordinates because the relay is gone, they're working from the initial request data, which is general area, not specific positions. In this visibility, a general area tasking without updated coordinates produces a significant probability of mission abort. Her voice was level, working through it as she spoke. But it's not certain, and 40 minutes is a compressed window for what I'm describing. What are you describing? Callahan said. I need to take the relay, and then I need to be somewhere they're not going to find if the air asset does arrive with thermal. A beat. I need to come inside. The words sat in the air of the operations room. Inside the base, Callahan said. The building itself provides thermal masking that the open ridgeline doesn't. If I'm inside and keep my external signature minimal, a thermal sweep from air is going to see a base that looks like a small, cold garrison, not a firing position. She paused. I set up internal shooting lanes before the column arrived. Before you knew there was a column, I can work from inside the building. Davis had turned around again. He was looking at Callahan with the expression of a man whose understanding of the last 6 days has just been revised at a fundamental level. She had prepared firing positions inside the base before anyone knew the base needed defending. Before the storm hit, before the column moved, before the intelligence fragment had come through Davis's damaged antenna. She had been here walking the perimeter with Callahan, asking about rooftop angles and building gaps and thermal differentials, not as reconnaissance, as final confirmation of a plan she'd already drawn. Understood, Callahan said into the radio. Come in. We'll be ready. He lowered the radio and looked at his people. She's built shooting lanes inside this building, he said, before we knew we needed them. He said it simply without drama because the facts themselves were drama enough. I need every non-essential piece of equipment moved away from the northern corridor in the eastern interior wall. Give her the space she designed. Move. They moved. Nobody asked questions. The time for questions about Emily Carter had passed somewhere around the ninth shot when the asking started to feel like a category error, like asking a river why it flows downhill. At 15:57, a single shot came from the southwestern slope. Different from the previous shots, smaller caliber, Carter's voice on the radio 10 seconds after, "Relay is down." They transmitted for approximately 90 seconds. Valley Command has the request but no confirmation coordinates and no ability to follow up. A pause. "I'm moving to your position now. Unlock the east maintenance door." Reyes was already moving before Callahan said anything. At 16:03, Emily Carter came through the east maintenance door and into the building for the last time. She had been outside for over 5 hours. The snow on her jacket was layered, not fresh accumulation, but compressed, the kind that builds over hours of movement through a storm and partially melts from body heat and refreezes into something almost structural. Her hands were bare. She'd been shooting barehanded in a blizzard for 5 hours because gloves of any practical thickness change the feel of a trigger in ways that matter at extreme range. And she had made that calculation before she went out and kept it through every minute since. Callahan saw her hands and felt something physical move in his chest, not pity. Something harder than pity and quieter. She didn't acknowledge the cold. She moved through the maintenance corridor with the specific economy of someone whose body is running on reserves but whose mind is still operating at full capacity, which was the more important of the two things, and she clearly knew it. "East interior wall," she said as she passed him. "I need the room clear on the north side of the main corridor. And I need someone on your radio monitoring Krasnov's vehicle frequency continuously." "Davis is on it," Callahan said, following. "When the air asset approaches, if it does, it'll communicate with the column on a separate frequency. Davis needs to find it before it gets overhead." "Davis," Callahan raised his voice. "Already looking," Davis called back from the operations room. "I heard her." Carter moved to the east interior wall and studied it for a moment. Just a moment, the confirming look of someone who is checking a prepared position rather than evaluating a new one. Then she set her case down, opened it, and for the first time in 6 days in front of other people in a lit room, she removed what was inside. The room went quiet. Not from shock, they'd all understood intellectually what the case contained, but there is a difference between knowing a thing and seeing it, and the soldiers in that corridor stood with the specific silence of men who have just had an abstraction become concrete. It was a long rifle, but calling it a rifle was like calling a surgical instrument a knife, technically accurate and completely inadequate. Every component of it spoke to a single purpose executed at the highest possible level. The scope alone was a piece of engineering that cost more than most people's cars. The stock was adjusted to her specific dimensions, not standard dimensions. Her dimensions, the careful calibration of something built for one person's use over years of use. She assembled the final components with hands that move by memory. Barrel, scope, suppressor. Bipod adjusted to the precise angle she'd pre-calculated for the interior shooting position. She worked fast, not rushed. Fast the way surgeons are fast, no wasted movement, no unnecessary gesture. Every action placed exactly where the next action needs to find it. Torres said very softly to no one in particular, "That's not a medical kit." No one responded because there was nothing useful to say to that. Carter settled into the shooting position. She looked through the scope at the angle she'd prepared, made 2 small adjustments, looked again. "The window at the end of the corridor," she said without looking up. "Can you remove the glass?" Reyes moved before she finished the sentence. The sound of the window frame giving then the rush of cold air into the corridor, sharp and immediate. "Thank you," she said. "When?" Callahan asked. "I've been reading it for 6 hours. It's shifted 4 degrees in the last 40 minutes. It's going to shift back in about 8 minutes." She looked through the scope. "From this position, I can reach the command vehicle, I can reach the remaining forward vehicles, and I can reach the communications relay point if they activate a backup." A pause. "They have a backup. I found it in their traffic patterns this morning. They haven't activated it because they don't know I know about it." Callahan crouched beside her. "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to give Krasnov a reason to make a decision he's been avoiding for the last 2 hours. She kept her eye on the scope. "He knows he can't advance. His command structure is reduced. His communications are degraded. His foot teams failed. His drone is gone. His air support request is unconfirmed. and navigating terrible weather. She paused. He's a rational man who has run out of rational options. All I need to do is show him that the one thing he thought was still under his control, his command vehicle, his personal position, is also within reach. I can't say, Mom, you're going to shoot at his vehicle. Near it, she said, not at him. I told you the objective is not destruction. It's control. She settled her breathing. One round close enough to the command vehicle that he hears it impact the armor. Close enough that he understands the targeting solution exists and was deliberately not used. She looked up from the scope and met Callahan's eyes directly. He's smart enough to read that message. And if he's angry instead of rational, then the second round removes the backup relay before he can use it, and we're back to 40 minutes of weather-degraded air support uncertainty. She returned to the scope. But he won't be angry. He's past angry. He's been doing the same calculation I have for the last hour. He knows what the answer is. He just needs the last piece of information to make the decision official. Callahan looked at her for a long moment. At the woman who had walked into this base 6 days ago with a locked case and a cover story and a plan more complete than anything he had ever encountered, and had spent those 6 days being quietly, completely invisible right up to the moment she chose to be the most visible thing on the mountain. Okay, he said. He stood up. Davis continuous monitoring. Anything changes on that vehicle frequency, you call it immediately. Copy, Davis said. Callahan moved back to the operations room doorway, where he could see both Davis at the console and Carter in the corridor. He stood there with his arms at his sides and his hands empty, and he waited, which was the only thing left that was his to do. At 16:19, the 12th shot of the day was fired from inside the building. The suppressor reduced the report to something that was felt more than heard. A pressure, a concussion that moved through the corridor air like a word spoken in a very small room. Then silence, and in the silence, the distant sound of the round reaching its target, the specific hard ring of precision, meeting armor plate at an angle calculated to produce sound rather than penetration. Davis had his headset on. His body went rigid. Sergeant, his voice was a whisper. Krasnov is on the vehicle frequency. He's talking to Petrov. He listened hard. His face went through 3 expressions in 4 seconds. He's asking for a withdrawal route assessment. He wants to know if the access road is clear southbound. A pause. Petrov is confirming. The road is clear southbound. Nobody in the room moved. Sergeant, Davis said even quieter. He's ordering the withdrawal. The words arrived in the operations room the way significant things arrive, not with drama, but with a kind of impossible stillness, like the moment between lightning and thunder when the world holds itself perfectly motionless. All units, withdrawal, maintain column formation, all wounded transported, southern route, immediate. Davis translated in fragments, catching pieces, filling gaps. His voice was completely flat with the effort of maintaining composure over something that was by any measure not a small thing. 31 vehicles, 80+ soldiers. A column that had come up a mountain at dawn, the casual confidence of the force that had already decided the outcome. Withdrawing. Not under fire, not en route, not in panic. Withdrawing in formation, organized, maintained, because their commander had received through a single round against armor plate the last piece of information he needed to make the calculation final. It took 11 minutes for the column to complete its withdrawal formation. Callahan watched it through the observation window. The vehicles turning the careful management of a large force on a narrow road, the discipline of soldiers who had been in contact all day and were now executing a withdrawal with the same professionalism they'd brought to the advance. He watched until the last vehicle disappeared around the southern bend of the mountain road, and the road was empty and white and full of the storm's own indifferent noise. The base was quiet, not the brittle quiet of an operation at its peak, the loose released quiet of something that is finished. Davis had his headset off. He was sitting very still at the console with both hands in his lap. Torres was at the fuel monitor staring at it without reading it. Reyes was in the doorway of the main corridor, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, looking at nothing specifically. Callahan walked to the east corridor. Emily Carter was already breaking down the rifle, components coming apart in the same deliberate sequence. They'd come together, scope, bipod, suppressor barrel. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was normal. She was performing the action of a person completing a task, not a person coming down from something extraordinary which was its own kind of extraordinary. He watched her for a moment, and then he crouched down his back against the corridor wall at the level of someone who is sitting with another person rather than standing over them. 12 shots, he said. 12 shots, she confirmed. 11 if you don't count the drone. I count the drone, he nodded. Not one of his men is dead, not one. 4 officers, but even non-fatal impacts to non-vital structures in all 4 cases, she said quietly. They'll have significant injuries. They'll recover. He looked at her. You planned that from the first shot. She kept her hands moving on the rifle. The objective was to stop the column and preserve the intelligence value of capturing its command element intact. Krasnov knows things we need. His officers know things we need. Dead men are an endpoint. Retreating men are a conversation. She placed the barrel section carefully in the case. I needed them frightened, not martyred. There's a very specific difference in what each one produces. You've done this before, he said. Not a question. Yes. How many times she looked at him, the door that had been opening by centimeters throughout the day was in this moment open enough to actually see through. Enough to know that it's possible, she said, and enough to know that possible is not the same as easy. He sat with that. Were you scared out there? Any part of today? She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, at 14:53, when they sent the foot teams and I was repositioning for the western approach and the wind shifted 2 degrees more than I'd predicted, she placed another component in the case. I had about 15 seconds where the solution I'd prepared wasn't the solution I needed, and I had to build a new one while moving. That was the part that, she paused, that required more than I'd expected. It was the closest she'd come to vulnerability all day. It lasted exactly as long as the sentence took to say, and then it was over, and she was back to the careful, deliberate assembly of a person wrapping up a finished thing. 15 seconds, he said. 15 seconds is a long time, she said. At 16:41, Davis got the uplink back. It came suddenly and fully, not the degraded fragments of the previous transmissions, but a clean signal, the kind that meant either the storm had shifted or the antenna had found a gap in the interference. He was transmitting and receiving within 30 seconds, his voice carrying the compressed urgency of a man trying to say the most important things first in case the window closed again. Callahan took the radio. He reported position secure. Column in withdrawal, 0 KIA, communications restored, generator at low capacity, requesting immediate resupply and engineering support. The voice that came back was a general, which meant someone had been watching this longer than Davis's transmissions could account for. Sergeant Callahan, we've been monitoring the situation. Resupply is already staged. Weather window opens in approximately 2 hours. Well done. Callahan looked at the radio. Sir, I need to report that the defense of this position was conducted primarily by a single attached asset, Corporal Emily Carter. Her actions over approximately 7 hours constituted the full defensive capability of this installation. A pause on the other end, longer than weather or signal delay accounted for. That information is noted, Sergeant. Corporal Carter's status and assignment details will be handled through her originating command. Sir, with respect, my people deserve to know who fought beside them today. Another pause. Sergeant, some of that information may eventually become available, but today Corporal Carter is a field medic who was assigned to your installation and performed her duties. The voice was not unkind. It was the voice of a man managing several truths at once and choosing the one that fit the current moment. That's the official account. Callahan looked at Emily Carter, who was closing the clasps on her case with the same quiet precision she brought to everything. She was listening. She didn't react to the transmission. She didn't need to. He keyed the radio. Copy that, sir. One more thing. The column's withdrawal route, there's an opportunity for interdiction in the valley before they reach their extraction point. Their command structure is degraded. Their intelligence regarding the defensive capability here is likely being revised in real time, and Colonel Krasnov has information that would be valuable. He paused. I'd suggest someone meet them at the bottom of the mountain. A longer pause. That suggestion is noted, Sergeant. Thank you, sir. He set the radio down. Carter was standing with her case at her side, looking at him in. You're going to make that suggestion work, she said. Someone should get credit for today that isn't going into a file that doesn't have a name, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. And then for the first time in 6 days, Emily Carter did something she hadn't done once in all the hours of planning and executing in cold and silence, and 12 shots and 1 drone and 31 armored vehicles in a mountain in a blizzard. She smiled. It was small, it was brief, it was completely real. When the resupply lands, she said, "I'm going to need a new coffee." "Yeah," he said, "you've earned about 6. He turned back to his people, Davis at the console, Torres at the fuel monitor, Reyes in the doorway, and felt the specific quality of being on the other side of something. The loose, earned quiet of men who have been through a thing and are still standing, which is the only version of victory that actually costs what it's worth. He thought about a column of 31 vehicles that had come up a mountain to erase 10 soldiers and had left instead whole, unbroken, retreating in formation because a single person had made advancing more expensive than any rational commander could justify paying. Not with firepower, not with superior numbers, with precision and patience and a level of preparation so complete that the battle had been won before the first shot in the quiet days, when a woman with a locked case asked questions about wind direction and looked at rooftops and said things like, "Long conditions require long preparation." The storm was beginning to ease, just barely a degree of reduced pressure, a slight thinning in the texture of the white outside the windows. Enough to suggest that the mountain was done making things hard, at least for today. Callahan stood in the operations room of a base that should have fallen by noon and was still standing at 6 in the evening, and he understood something that he suspected he would spend a long time trying to put into words and never quite manage. The mountain hadn't saved them. The storm hadn't saved them. 10 exhausted soldiers with failing power and dead communications and borrowed time hadn't saved them. One woman had walked onto a mountain with a plan she'd built alone, executed it alone, and handed them back their lives so cleanly and completely that the men who came to take those lives went home with their own lives intact and would spend the rest of their careers trying to understand what had happened to them on that road and would never fully succeed. Because some things that happen at 3,200 meters in a blizzard are simply beyond the resolution that ordinary instruments can achieve. The 12th shot had ended the battle, but the battle had ended before the first shot was fired. That was the truth of it. That was the whole truth of it, and it would stay the truth of it long after the files were closed and the column reached the valley and the resupply bird landed and Emily Carter walked away with her case and her coffee and her name in a document that didn't officially exist. Some soldiers fight the war that's in front of them. Emily Carter had fought the war that was coming, and she had won it before anyone else knew it had started.